Hello there, and welcome back to our Demystifying Microsoft podcast. In this episode of What's New with Microsoft, we're going to be discussing an announcement that Microsoft made last week. Huge announcement, big time announcement from Microsoft regarding enterprise agreements. Again, my name is Wade Walker. I'm the Vice President of our Microsoft Alliance at the Sourcepass MCOE. And as my role as the Vice President of our Microsoft Alliance, one of my responsibilities is helping transform the complexity of the Microsoft ecosystem to you, our coworkers, our other partners. It can get a little hectic out there with all the changes, including last week's announcement. So one of the main goals of this series is to help you understand all the new updates at Microsoft, which come at us pretty fast. Today, we're taking a break from our Copilot Agent series, which I hope you're enjoying. And we're going to discuss a massive change to Microsoft's enterprise agreements. If you're not familiar with enterprise agreements, commonly referred to as EAs, they're licensing models that are typical for larger companies, for state, local, and education companies, and for federal government organizations. I talked about EAs earlier this year, and I'm providing another update today based on information that Microsoft dropped last week, back on August 12th, with some major announcements to the Microsoft enterprise agreement licensing model. As a refresher, you might be asking yourself, hey, what's an enterprise agreement? It's a 3-year contract that locks in the price of Microsoft products and services, such as Microsoft Server products, think Windows Server, think SQL Server, as well as Microsoft 365 services, think Microsoft 365 E3, E5, Business Premium, Exchange Online, etc. What was announced last week is that beginning on November 1st of this year, Microsoft is removing all of the discount pricing for the online services for commercial organizations, not government, education, or federal government yet, but removing the discount pricing for commercial organizations and EAs and something else known as MPSA, Microsoft Products and Services Agreements. This is a big deal. This didn't get as much press as I was expecting last week. I was paying attention to the news channels. I think they're more focused on some geopolitical news. But this is a big deal out there. Microsoft's had 4 different pricing levels for enterprise agreements for years, heck, for decades. They're known as levels A, B, C, and D, and the discount level goes up as you go from A to D, and it's usually aligned with a company's size, number of users. Larger organizations are going to be in the B, C, or D levels, and again, with discounts in increasing for each level. By removing this discounted pricing and everybody basically being at level A the same, this is a massive announcement that just completely changes the construct of whether or not an enterprise agreement, an EA, or an MPSA is the right fit for an organization. Microsoft has titled this Pricing Consistency. In fact, the article is titled Microsoft Online Services Pricing Consistency Update. And what Microsoft's been talking about for years and has been implementing, including what was announced last week, is a pricing consistency model that goes across server products, Microsoft 365 products, regardless of the acronym that we've got for licensing, EA, MPSA, and the list goes on. Now, you might be asking about Azure. Well, ironically, Azure's had pricing consistency for years. You may have noticed this as you've priced out Azure and got pricing quotes for Azure from various organizations. There isn't really a discounting model for Azure. Azure is included in enterprise agreements, but it's had a pricing consistency model for quite some time. It's nice now, other online services and products such as Microsoft 365 and server products and so on are going to have pricing consistency models. And I do need to make sure that this is, I'm clear on this. When I'm talking about Windows Server, SQL Server, these are more for the subscriptions in the CSP model and are in the online services realm. Pricing really isn't changing for on-premise pricing where you're buying the old school Microsoft Windows Server product that's just licensed for a on-premise server. This is really for these changes are really focused on the online services world. So now that we know that this is changing come November 1st, what are the impacts of these changes? Well, let's dive into the top 3 impacts of these changes. First off, enterprise agreement and MPSA agreement pricing will now be similar to pricing that's commonly referred to CSP. I mentioned CSP earlier. CSP stands for Cloud Solution Provider. In fact, in last week's announcement, Microsoft commented this new pricing will align with the pricing published on Microsoft.com. For people familiar with CSP, we're already aware that CSP pricing aligns with the pricing published on Microsoft's website. These additional changes to enterprise agreements and MPSAs represent another great shift towards pricing consistency across all of Microsoft's licensing models. Second of the big 3 changes to talk about, or the big 3 impacts of the changes. For customers with EAs and MPSAs, these changes take effect at the customer's next agreement renewal, or when a customer purchases new online services within their EA or MPSA after November 1st. For customers with 3-year agreements, their agreement's going to renew every 3 years. Most people negotiated their agreements to start and end around June 30th, Microsoft end of the fiscal year for the best discounting. So for most people, most customers with EAs, you're going to see the impacts of this starting. It goes live in November 1st, but you're going to see the impacts in reality starting in June of next year. It's important to note also that many customers with EAs and or MPSAs also already have CSP licensing for license quantities above the thresholds that are in place for EAs and MPSAs. In my opinion, these companies should really consider consolidating licensing to CSP if they haven't already begun this transition. And then lastly, the third big impact of this change that was announced last week, CSP providers are going to be able to compete on even ground with EA pricing, with the exception of a 3-year price lock, because as I mentioned earlier, EA gives a 3-year price lock. It is important to note, though, that Microsoft has been adding 3-year pricing options to CSP pricing. If you remember, most CSP pricing for years has been a month-to-month or an annual pricing. And I did a previous episode here on what's new with Microsoft back in May of this year, May of 2025, where I did a deep dive into 3-year subscription terms in CSP. Back then, Microsoft had announced that effective June 1st, CSP pricing was going to have 3-year price locks for Microsoft 365 E3 and E5s, which are the hero products in the enterprise licensing of Microsoft 365 products. The list of subscriptions announced back then that I talked about in May not only included Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 with 3-year terms, but also Teams Enterprise, Microsoft 365 E5 security product, and the E5 compliance product also got 3-year terms. So those are the to me, the top 3 impacts of these changes. One, we're going to see similar pricing across EAs, MPSAs, and CSP. 2, customers that already have EAs and MPSAs, they typically have CSPs and should consider migrating everything to CSP. And then 3, Microsoft announced earlier this year the 3-year terms for a number of Microsoft 365 subscriptions, which went into place June 1st. I'm expecting we'll see a further announcement soon of additional products that will have 3-year terms in Microsoft 365 for the CSP model. I would expect that either later this year or sometime in 2026. Okay, wow, what an update. Personally, I've been working with EAs for many years, back when I was running IT departments and I was buying enterprise agreements. And then I started pivoting to the CSP model back in 2016 timeframe when it came out. By then I was working at a Microsoft partner and we were selling and implementing CSP solutions. It was obvious to me back then, nearly 10 years ago, that CSP was going to be the pricing program of the future. And it appears that future is beginning to arrive to me, which is great news. Thank you for attending this episode of What's New with Microsoft. Join us next time when we continue our series on Copilot agents. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to comment on it, share it. Really helps our channels. Don't forget to subscribe. In addition, please go to our website at sourcepassmcoe.com to learn more and chat with one of our experts. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.